My Burbank Talks presents another episode of Meet the Candidate, the show where we invite anyone appearing on the Burbank ballot in the 2024 election to join us here and give our listeners a chance to learn about their background and the issues important to them. Now, let's join our podcast.
Hello, Burbank. Craig Sherwood here with you once again, and another edition of Meet the Candidate, the show that we have producing, which we allow any candidate who appears on the Burbank ballot to come in, and we talk about his views, talk about him, so you get a chance to know the candidate in a little more conversational way, so we can you can make your opinions when it comes to the March 5th election, in fact, and then hopefully on to November too. So today with us, we have somebody who's been on our show before in another capacity, but today he's on our capacity as candidate, and that is Nick Schultz, who currently serves as the mayor of Burbank, but is also an assembly candidate for the 44th district. Nick, good to have you on the show today.
Hey, thanks so much, Craig. Really glad to be back with you.
Well, it's I think it's important to have you on, especially as a candidate, and because yes, people in Burbank may know you, but the 44th Assembly District, includes Burbank, of course, Glendale, La Crescenta, Sunland, Tahunga, North Hollywood, Toluca Lake, Studio City, and Sherman Oaks, besides some other little parts of this and that. That's a very, very large district, and I'm sure a lot of people may not know you in those areas, and it's this is a good way for them to get to know you.
Absolutely. And even those in Burbank who will be voting, even if you know what I've done on the council, people should be asking, what would you do in the assembly? What are your priorities? So really just grateful for the opportunity, Craig, to be here with you.
Well, we'll get into that. Let's start. I like to go back and kind of start at the beginning of things. So
Sure.
Back in the days of single digit age, they probably called you Nicky or Nicholas and all that.
Both. By
Okay,
the way.
there you go. So at what point did you want to become, because you're a lawyer also, and a politician now?
Yeah.
So what were your first thoughts of what did you want to do when you were a kid? But what led you into law to start with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to give, you and all your listeners a little bit more of my backstory, some you've heard, some you haven't. So I was born in La Mesa, just outside of San Diego, raised by a single mom. My dad left at an early age, but I came from pretty humble roots. I mean, my dad was a car mechanic, worked at the dealerships. My mom was and still is to this day a legal assistant, legal secretary, at a time when you could get a job like that in the mid '80s without needing a college degree or anything. So, when I was about 5 years old, we moved to Oregon, to a little town called Gresham outside of Portland. And, I was raised by my mom and my maternal grandparents. And, like every other kid going to school, just, getting older, experiencing life. I guess, I really didn't know what I would do. I figured, maybe.
What kind of student were you in high school?
Oh, I mean, by high school, I was on the debate team, track and field. I was like your typical go-getter, like trying to earn my Letterman jacket.
Okay.
And, when I was little, I really didn't know. I just figured, I'd, do something like my parents. But as I got older, my grandpa and my mom in particular both really pushed me. They wanted me to go to college. They wanted me to have all of the opportunities that they hadn't had. And so in high school.
Did your mother go to college? Was she a college graduate?
No, not initially. Now, later in her career, she took a little bit of college coursework at Mount Hood Community College. That was our local one.
But that's every parent's dream, right? For
Yeah.
the kid to go and graduate from college. So I can imagine that was a very strong influence for you.
Yeah, and I still remember to this day, when I graduated college, my grandpa wasn't with us to be there, but my mom and my grandma were there. It was a banner day for our family. And I'm proud to say that after me, my brother ended up going to the University of Oregon as well. And I could sense all the pride and just all the emotion because they had poured 18 plus, well, at that point, 22 plus years into us to give us that opportunity. And so to your point, when I graduated, I really thought long and hard about how I wanted to spend my life. And I thought about all the love and the care and the protection that my family had provided me. And I thought, I want to do that for other people. I want to give back to my community. After I graduated law school, I never really thought about going into the private practice of law.
Which law school where'd you graduate from?
University of Oregon.
Okay.
So I went there for
Go Ducks.
Go Ducks. So I went there for 4 years, and then I immediately went into law school, and I was looking at actually coming to LA. I was looking at UCLA, for example. But I mean, I didn't have much money. So when the University of Oregon basically offered me half off, I mean, that's not a deal I could beat. So still graduated, by the way, with almost $150,000 in student loan debt. I mean, I'm actually just paying that off now and getting some of it forgiven. But I mean, it's a barrier. A lot of people can't afford that. And I was very lucky. Even at half off, I still have to pay all that. But, I had a lot of opportunities. And anyway, went to U of O.
Yeah, I think that's something, and who knows, as you maybe with the latter, student debt and going to college should not be such a barrier for, which is probably why we don't have a lot of diversity sometimes, and a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
it would help our minorities a lot more if they didn't have to worry about being saddled with $150,000 or $200,000 in debt down the line. I think that our country needs to do a better job, like universal health care too.
Oh,
Those are things that need to be done. Now, that's a national basis. We're not here for that. But I think those are, good things. So you got into law,
Mm-hmm.
went to law school, you graduated, and you said you weren't thinking really about, but that somehow led you to the California Attorney General's office.
Yeah, so 2013, I'm out of law school, and I started working as a deputy district attorney in Oregon. So I'm prosecuting domestic violence, drunk driving, attempted murder. I mean, just anything, right? Anything that happened in the Lane County community. And then in 2016, and by the way, backstory, I'd met my wife in law school. I was in my final year. She was starting her first year. We start dating. So there was a lot that was, keeping me in Eugene, obviously, pursuing my relationship with Allie. But 2016, Allie's graduated, I'm graduated, and I applied for a job with the California Attorney General's office. I had interned there in law school, and I always loved it because I just thought that was like the cream of the top. Like it was one of the best opportunities you'd ever have to serve California. The work that they do at DOJ is incredible. I knew I wanted to be part of it. And in 2016, I got lucky. I got hired and I was able to come to LA and work under Kamala Harris for like that long. And then it ended up being Javier Becerra for a while.
Are you allowed to say much about what you kind of focus on in your
Oh, yeah.
role? Because I know that, a lot of stuff is, attorney style stuff, but can you focus on it all? What you're what you key on in your job?
Absolutely. So I'm currently in, so DOJ has a criminal law division, a civil law division, and a public rights. I won't go through all of that. But the reason I bring that up is my section is called Special Prosecutions, and we're in the criminal law division. So most of what DOJ does historically is on appeal, defend the convictions that were secured by the district attorney's office. So DA's office gets someone convicted, criminal defendant's going to appeal it. Historically, DOJ was really a bunch of appellate attorneys just saying, no, the conviction was right. Number of years back, maybe 20, 25 years back, DOJ started to realize that there are some cases that are better prosecuted by our office, especially if it involves crimes that were committed in multiple counties or really large scale fraud, like millions of dollars taken out of state public funds. So this unit was created. So just to bring it more up to date, Craig, so kind of cases I do, they fall into maybe 4 or 5 categories. We do your financial fraud cases. So I've handled cases where people, I'll just give you one example. There was a case in the height of the pandemic, while I was actually running for Burbank City Council, I did a grand jury, and I can't talk too much about the grand jury, but I can tell you about the case. There were a group of folks who were going to homeowners who were at risk of losing their home, and they were saying, hey, Craig, don't worry about paying your mortgage. Just pay us $1,500 a month. We'll keep you in your home. Well, you know where it's going.
Oh,
so all of a sudden,
especially senior citizens probably.
A lot of senior citizens and a lot of, folks where English is not their first language.
Right.
So, they target these people. And so all of a sudden, the deed on your house, 5% interest would be given to Ross Benson. But in some cases, Ross isn't a real person.
We got to watch out for Ross
I
Benson.
know,
though.
right? Well, and so if you're wondering, okay, how does the scheme work? So let's say you're not making the payments on your house. I'm the bank. I want to come in and foreclose on you. Well, all of a sudden, Ross Benson, who has 5% interest in your house, files a petition for bankruptcy in federal court. Well, under the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution, federal matters trump state matters. I can't foreclose on your house until his bankruptcy petition's resolved. And so, and then let's say, Ross doesn't show up because he's not real or he doesn't know about it. They just do it again, over and over to different people. So point I'm making is 10 years would go by. Bank would be getting no money. You'd be staying in your home. Eventually, the scheme would end. You lose your house. The bank is out the money that they should have had 10 years ago. And the person who was defrauding you saying, pay me $1,500 a month, they make off like bandits. So doing a lot of stuff like that.
And these are not sexy crimes. These are not the big high profile crimes, but they're the crimes that really do affect an everyday person you probably don't really hear or see about much in the news.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that's one category. I also handle public corruption cases. So elected officials that are committing perjury, using public funds, like just things they shouldn't be doing, right?
You've probably been pretty busy with the LA City Council lately, huh?
I could
I know
say,
you can't tell any specifics, but
I can tell you that thankfully in Burbank we don't appear to have that problem. But you're right, there is a lot of public corruption around the state, and I've definitely had my fair share of investigating folks like that. Another case we've been doing lately is officer involved shootings. So anytime a person who's unarmed, not doesn't have a gun, for example, anytime they are shot and killed by the police in the state of California, I am one of a team of prosecutors who investigates that and determines whether or not the police officer should be charged with murder or manslaughter. So that's another very high profile, high pressure kind of case. And then I'd say two more, I'll be quick. Environmental crimes. So the 2017 Thomas Fire and the 2018 Woolsey Fire that burned all the way to Malibu.
Mhm.
I was the prosecutor assigned to investigating if Southern California Edison had committed any crimes, or any individuals at Edison had committed crimes.
I honestly, I don't remember how that came out because, we're not part of Southern California Edison here. We have our own Burbank Water and Power, thank goodness.
Mm-hmm.
But did you find that now, is negligence part of a criminal thing? Were they negligent in their operations, or what did you find on that?
So I would tell you, personally speaking, I think that there were things that the company could have done that they didn't do. But being negligent isn't enough to charge someone with a crime. It usually has to rise to the level of what we call criminal negligence or recklessness in the law. We had an investigation. We concluded that we could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that anyone had committed a crime. But I still like to think that the investigation we did led to Edison changing a lot of their
I was going
practices.
to ask you, did that change to either updated laws and regulations, or so in the long run it did some good?
I think so. I think if nothing else, undergoing an investigation so public like that led Edison to really evaluate, how are we spending our money? How can we better guard against the risk of a major wildland fire? And I still think there was some good to come of it.
Okay.
And then the last category of case is human and labor trafficking. And so I think I've talked about it on the show, where I know I've talked about it with you before,
Right.
but the most notable.
And let me also bring up that we just passed something on the Burbank City Council. And once again, this is not
Right.
We're not here as a Burbank mayor or council member, but
Correct.
But you did champion this through the Burbank City Council, and maybe talk a little about what you just got passed by the council.
Yeah. So at the last council meeting, we introduced an ordinance that was brought by a community member, Gloria Salas, working with our city attorney's office. So under California law, certain businesses like massage parlors, for example, hotels, motels, they're required to post a notice somewhere that's really obvious and visible that says, if you or someone you suspect is a victim of human trafficking, call or text this number. And it's supposed to be posted in at least English and Spanish, and then other languages too. The problem is the state law has no penalty if someone doesn't post the notice. And so we created an ordinance where there is a fine attached to a business that, doesn't post the notice. And we're going to be partnering with the Zonta Club of Burbank to go out there and to educate businesses and to get these notices up. And that really stems from my work, Craig, on a case that really spanned several years before the pandemic and during the pandemic. But I was part of the trial team on the Nason Joaquin Garcia case. Mr. Garcia was, and I believe still is, the leader of a church based out of Mexico called the Light of the World,
I've
or
heard of this, yes.
La Luz del Mundo. So our investigation revealed that he was trafficking and sexually abusing children, and there were 4 very brave young women who came forward who had been abused in Los Angeles County. And with their testimony and their help, we were able to charge the case. When he landed at LAX, he was apprehended. We litigated the case for several years, and I'm happy to say that he eventually pled guilty to some of the charges, and he's now in the California Department of Corrections, where he cannot hurt other children.
That's making a difference.
I
For a lot of people right there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you have a vast background in many areas. So we talked about how big this district is.
Mm-hmm.
How are you getting yourself introduced around the district and letting people know the substance of who Nick Schultz is?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I'm known in Burbank, and that doesn't mean that I'm not still making efforts to outreach in Burbank. But outside of Burbank, there's no substitute. Sorry, no substitute for hard work. You got to go knock doors. You have to call voters. You have to text with voters, show up to community events, write letters to the editor. I'm doing all of those things in an effort to let them know a little bit more about me and about this race.
Because that is your challenge, though, is to reach out to voters and let them know who you are, and just not another name on the ballot.
Absolutely. And I don't want to take the wind out of your sails, Craig, but I would say, as a candidate in 2024, looking at a state race, the biggest challenge is not any of my competitors. The biggest challenge is that people in Burbank, for example, a lot of your listeners, they are paying a lot of attention to who our next United States Senator is going to be, whether it's Adam Schiff or someone else. A lot of people are also looking at that congressional seat. I mean, we have Senator Anthony Portantino and Assemblymember Laura Friedman both going for it. People don't always think about, oh yeah, and there's that state assembly seat. And then keep in mind that only one other candidate in the race has experience, currently serves in local office. It's a lot of first-time candidates. So I agree. That's the challenge, is reminding people that this race is happening. And then, of course, introducing yourself to all these new voters.
Okay. And let's talk about first-time candidates. What you're a first-time candidate, and when you're stepping into the Burbank City Council, what led you into politics that you thought, this is now another route for me?
So, I mean, no surprise. I am a registered Democrat, and I bring that up because it was the 2016 election that really got me more involved in politics. I mean, I was a regular voter. I've voted in every election that I can remember. But as I watched the rhetoric around the country, when we saw Secretary Clinton and candidate Donald Trump at the time, going toe to toe, there was so much volatility. And I got wrapped up in that election and felt that voting was good, but I needed to be more involved. I needed to walk precincts and knock doors and make calls and just take that next step in being more involved. When Secretary Clinton lost the race, and I saw some of the things that the Trump administration was doing that I just didn't sit well with me, I got involved with local Democratic clubs. So first it was with Democrats for Neighborhood Action in the city of Los Angeles, and then shortly thereafter, it was the Burbank Democratic Club. And getting together, endorsing candidates, writing letters, making calls for good pieces of legislation, opposing bad legislation. And so between early 2017 and 2020, over the course of 4 years, that's really what I was spending my time. When I wasn't at work, I was doing everything I could to get good folks elected, from, school boards all the way to the state assembly and the state senate.
That's okay. And then you came into Burbank and you said, let me give Burbank City Council a try, huh?
Well, yeah, basically. I mean, so I'll just share a little bit of the biography, and I know you've heard this before. So, my wife and I moved to Burbank. We're involved with Burbank Democratic Club years before. I was walking for Measure I, and but point is we moved to Burbank. It's where we wanted to call home, and then the pandemic hits. And then we hear that there's a retirement on council, Emily Gabeletti at the time. And, I had some folks from the club, from Burbank Democratic Club, that were coming to me and saying, you should really run. And I kept thinking of all the reasons not to, including the fact that I was, while I'd been involved, at least in Burbank Democratic politics, I was relatively new to the community. So I kept thinking of the reasons not to, but it just still kept eating at me like, okay, but what's the reason to do it? And for me, the reason I ran in 2020 was I saw a community that was hurting. I saw folks that were losing their jobs, folks that were at risk of losing their homes or their housing. And look, a lot of great people on council at the time, but I didn't feel that there was anyone that could speak to my lived experience. Someone who graduated with student loan debt, someone who, my first job in college, I was picking up trash and bottles and cans to help pay for college. Someone with my professional background, someone who had a wife and was planning for a young family, who had rented for a long time, can't afford to buy a single family home, but bought a nice condominium, what we could afford. All these things, I felt that there was the experience of a younger person trying to make it in this world that just wasn't represented on the council at the time. And that's why I ran.
Well, you bring up family and stuff, and let's how you balance. Okay, so being an attorney general is number one a very complicated job to start with. Okay,
hmm
and then of course now you've got a family. That's now you've got to balance family and job. Now you're running for council and you have the duties of mayor, which are very, you have to show up at a lot of events and stuff. So now you got that. Now you're a candidate. You're balancing four things. Is 24 hours a day enough for you? How are you doing all that?
I've gotten a lot of questions and some criticisms about that. So let me answer it in two parts. I'm going to answer it, sort of big picture, and then I'll focus on what I'm doing right now in these 2.5 months leading up to the election. So the way I have been handling it is two things. When you don't sleep much and when you organize everything in your day. I mean, from like if you look at my calendar, 6:30 to 7 is waking up and playing with Ella and Aiden. 7 to 8 is handling council emails, and you have work, and then you have your lunch break where you're fitting in a meeting. There isn't a lot of free time or gaps in my schedule, but that level of organization helps me do it all. And then, of course, having a day that starts at 6 and ends at midnight also helps a lot. And to be very fair, Craig, I think I also have the youth and the energy that I can cheat a little bit. If 10 years from now, we'll see if I have the stamina to keep doing it. But, one thing that folks have asked me is, right now in this time as mayor, how am I managing it? I have a very supportive office and management team at DOJ. And so I told them late last year, I'm going to go out on a leave of absence. So I'm not working, 8 to 5 at the DOJ, from now until election day. And my job, thanks to them, will be waiting there for me when I come back. But I told them I got to give this election my all, but I'm not going to fail in my duties as mayor. I'm not going to not show up to ribbon cuttings. I'm not going to, fail to be prepared for meetings. So luckily they're supportive of that. So right now, being mayor, if you will, is my 8 to 5 job. And outside of that, yes, I'm campaigning, and of course I'm saving time for family. But I luckily don't have that DOJ 8 to 5 obligation, at least from now to March 5th, to worry about.
Right. People don't realize that being mayor, being on the Burbank City Council is not a full-time job or anything else. It's a very part-time thing, but it turns into nearly a full-time job with all the different functions,
Oh,
your mayoral functions you have to perform times. So
yeah.
I appreciate that. So let's talk about the campaign trail a little.
Sure.
What have been some of you've been out there for now, probably a month or two, hoofing around. What are some of the surprises and some of the challenges you have found on the campaign trail right now?
A couple things. So not to repeat myself, but the first thing and the most obvious is that people don't really realize this election is happening. The other thing that I've noticed is that a couple years back we made the change as a state to where every presidential year we want to move up our primary to March. People are not used to that. Folks were waking up in January saying, "Oh yeah, there'll probably be an election later this
In
year."
June usually, but now it's Super Tuesday,
Exactly.
which right now is not turning much of a Super Tuesday the way the national campaigns have kind of fizzled. But even so, March 5th is our
Absolutely.
primary.
I mean, we're sitting here and it's Friday, February 2nd. And then, of course, whenever this gets posted and people start listening, people don't realize next week, Monday, Tuesday, your ballot's going to start to arrive. Like the election is here. So that's probably been the biggest challenge. The other thing I would just say is that I also sense a lot of burnout. I think that we've had a lot of contentious elections the last few cycles, the last several presidential cycles, to say the least. And I think that people, what I have found from walking on a lot of doors over the last year, believe it or not, I've been running almost a year at this point. Um, People are tired of talk. I mean, talk's great. They want candidates who say the right things and believe the right things, but people want someone who's going to deliver results. And much like a business, right? This is a results-driven industry. You can mean well, but you have to be able to point to a record of accomplishment, and you also have to be able to deliver on what you promise. And I think, the one advantage I have found in the campaign so far is a lot of people are coming to them saying, I support this and I support that. I'm able to go and say, look, this is what I believe, and you don't have to take my word for it. For better or worse, whether you vote for me or not, you can look at what I've done with my time on council, and you can judge me based on that. But I think my record speaks very well for itself, and I'm proud of what my colleagues and I have done.
Okay. Any surprises though?
Um, you know, Not really. Nothing that I really didn't anticipate.
That's
No.
what you expected, huh?
I knew it was going to be a slog. I guess if I had to pick something, I didn't realize. I guess. Okay, if there's one surprise, it's this. I am kind of shocked that in a lot of so there's 7 candidates running, and I'm sure your viewers will get to hear most of them or all of them. To think that I'm the most experienced candidate, at least in terms of service as a state employee, but also even elected experience. I'm kind of like, look, I'm the young buck in the room. Like, how am I the most experienced person in the race? And yet, I only have one competitor who's been on her city council for, I don't know, like maybe like a year and a half. I really expected there'd be a bigger name or someone who'd like served on LAUSD school board, someone else jump in this race. So I think that's been a real shock to me.
I can see that. Well, let's talk a little about the step. Right now, you're sitting on a city council. You're one of 5 votes, but you have influence. That 1/5 has influence, and you're able to bring up things and get a lot of things passed. But when you were elected to the assembly, you become one of 80.
Yeah.
It's a lot larger body, and now trying to get a bill passed and everything else is going to be a whole different matter, and you have to get, I'm sure, allies and work together, and now you have Democrats versus Republicans and the entire gamut.
hmm
What's that experience going to be like?
I've thought a lot about that, and I know we'll probably talk more about this in a few minutes, Craig. But to anyone who thinks that it's an easy decision to leave council and run for assembly, I can tell you it's not, because you're right. On a council, I mean, you get a chance to be mayor for a little bit.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second
yeah.
and say this. Because of state law, you can't run for 2. Your term expires in December,
hmm
or November, I mean, and you can't run for 2 offices at once. So you're kind of all in on the assembly race. You cannot run for Burbank City Council again at this time while you're a candidate for assembly. So you're all in on this.
You have to be. I mean, so just to unpack that quickly, Craig, because you're right. So under state law, if I make the runoff, I'm going to knock on a piece of wood here. If I make the runoff, meaning I'm in the top 2, by law, I cannot run for that city council seat again. Now, if you make it to the runoff and you finish second, well, you're not an assembly member and you're not a council member. So there is a bit of a risk to all that. But you're right. I mean, I'm all in for the assembly, and I think the reason why, and just the one thing I want to get out of the way before we get back to your other question there, Craig, the one thing I've heard over the course of the last year is a concern or a worry that I'm leaving Burbank. This is our home. This is where we're raising our kids. I love this community. And to anyone who worries that that might be the case, all I can say is I assure you it's not. I'm not leaving Burbank. To me, running for the assembly is even leveling up a further commitment to my community, because the reality, and this kind of goes back to your question, when you're on the city council, you are one of 5 votes. You get a chance to be mayor, and you're talking about, you have a lot of power, a lot of influence. You get to vote on infrastructure improvements, but there's also a lot of help that we need from the state. I mean, I'll just give you one example. The state legislature passes the annual budget for the entire state. The state legislature funds our schools. And as much as we've talked in the past in Burbank about parcel taxes and bonds, the reality is we need to reform how we fund schools. And I can't do that at the city council level. And I'll give you one just really granular, specific example. We fund our schools based on average daily attendance. So if we have 100 seats in the schoolhouse,
We call it seats, butts in the seats.
that's right. Oh, I mean, I'm so glad we're talking about this, you and I. You know it better than I
Yes.
do. I mean, so average day, you have 90 kids that show up for whatever the reason. School's only getting funding for the 90 kids. How is that fair when the school has to plan to provide for all 100 children, whether it's, the staffing, the food, the textbooks, light? I mean, these are fixed expenses. We are setting schools up for failure. And the point is, we need more help to do that. I think that that's an obvious answer. And I've heard our current elected officials talk about it and say, yes, that makes sense. Still hasn't been done. And the point I'm trying to make is that I'm running for the assembly because our schools need help. It's not the only issue I'm running on, but we need someone up there who knows how to get things done and is going to fight to save our schools, for example. And I just feel that I can do that with the knowledge and the experience better than any other candidate.
I know that years ago when we passed the California lottery, and the big thing about getting it passed was, well, the money's going to go to the schools, and it's going to be a windfall for the schools, and it's going to help the schools. And the money, it's been true, the money has all gone to schools, but our government in Sacramento decided, well, if they're getting this amount of money by the lottery, we don't need to put that amount of money in anymore. So it's never increased. It's always stayed the same. It should have remained the same funding by the state and added with the California lottery money, but that didn't happen. So that was a shortcoming on our elected officials at that time, and something you might have to look into if you're going to get up there.
Yeah, I mean, with any luck, I will. But yes, no, I appreciate the question, and you're right, Craig. I mean, it's a trade-off. I mean, there's a lot of good that you can do, that I am trying to do on the city council. But at the end of the day, folks, another question I get a lot is, so what is the legislature? What is the assembly? What does it do? I mean, they set all that state funding from education to infrastructure projects. They also pass laws. I mean, whether it's saying what is or is not a crime, or how to regulate industries, or ensure that our environment is preserved and kept clean. I mean, there's a lot to do. But to your point, you are one of 80 assembly members. You're one of 120 total legislators that are up there. So it's hard work, because you have to build consensus and build alliances and convince people of your point.
Yeah, and that's not going to be easy. What are some of the areas in the 44th district that you feel are the most important, if you were elected, that you need to focus on?
Well, so geographically, I would say, of course, Burbank is always going to be near and dear to my heart. And, North Glendale is very close, and we obviously share a lot in common. But I think, this is a majority city of LA district, and people always think of Sherman Oaks and Studio City, but I also, sorry, I also think of, Sunland Tahunga, parts of the district that don't always get the attention.
Not the sexier parts.
Right. People know Studio City. They know Toluca Lake. They know Sherman Oaks. But the district also includes Valley Village and Sunland Tahunga and Montrose. These are areas that very much need someone who's going to bring resources back to those areas, to the residents, to the businesses. That's, I think point I'm trying to make is it's all important. And the person in this seat has to understand that and also be present in the district. One thing I commit to not doing is I'm not going to be that legislator who flies out Sunday night, back Friday morning, just in district for the weekend. again, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but if I'm fortunate enough to make it, with 2 kids at home, I'll be coming back midweek into district to spend time with them. Luckily, I only live 10 minutes door to door to the airport, but I'm going to remain connected to Burbank and to the district at large.
Well, it's convenient to have an airport in the city you live in. That's very convenient to use. And of course, now with the new terminal, the replacement terminal dedication,
yes.
That's going to be a big asset for you.
Very much so.
Okay, so the election goes well. We're in November. You win. Congratulations. Now you walk into Sacramento, and they have a new rule. New rule that they just put in. They're going to say it's the first year assembly rule, and that means you can bring up any bill you want to bring up, and that bill will be passed with no riders or no attachments or no anything else, but only one subject and one thing only.
Okay.
What would that one bill be that Nick Schultz says, I want to make this into law?
Oh, Craig, you're challenging me there. I'm long-winded. I have so many things, so many ideas, but okay. One change. Single-payer healthcare. And the reason I say that is because I really believe in my heart, healthcare is a human right. The way that we have healthcare in this country right now, and I'm not just saying abstractly. I was on the phone with a voter today telling me that because of the high premiums, they don't have healthcare insurance. It's a choice between getting healthcare or paying the rent, getting your medication or getting groceries on the table. To me, we're the world's 4th largest economy. We talk all the time about how great California is, and I believe we are. And yet it's an economy that is leaving way too many people behind. That is not acceptable. Every single person in the state of California should be covered and have access to quality medical care, period. If I could do one thing, it would be that. That's a huge lift, obviously, but I'll just say one other thing on that, Craig, because I know you have more you want to ask. We've been talking about public option in the past. We've been talking about single payer for a decade. We aren't that much closer to actually doing it. I don't have any illusion that this is going to be an easy lift. But that one of your earlier questions was, what have I seen talking to voters? It's that people are saying, okay, y'all think healthcare is single payer healthcare is great. How do you actually fund it? How do you actually put it into practice? How do you make it happen? So the point I'm trying to make, Craig, is if I'm lucky enough to get up there, I'm not going up there to have great talking points and to sound good and come back to my district and say, I'm talking about single payer healthcare. I'm fighting for it. I want to deliver on single payer healthcare. And the only way to do that is to sit every other legislator down, all the interest groups, and say, this is what I want to accomplish. This is my plan for getting it done. If you have a better way of doing it, let's talk. But we have to agree on one thing. People should not be walking around uninsured in this state. People should never be given what we call a Hobson's choice, that impossible choice to make. I can't go to the doctor today because I got to pay the rent. That is not acceptable.
With housing and with gun control and everything else, that was probably not on the tip of my tongue, but makes a whole lot of sense. And I think that when we got the quote Obamacare in our country, that helped a lot of people. Didn't go far enough,
right?
But it was a great start.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, especially with the prices of everything in California. It is tough.
Yeah.
For health care. Okay, but that's a fantastic thing. And boom, law. But here's a problem.
Okay.
We've had a nice budget surplus in California for a while now, and things are just great. Now suddenly we're going to be dealing with a deficit, and you're going to get your health care passed. And not only how you going to pay for your health pass, what about this deficit? What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, that is a phenomenal question, Craig. So, to everyone who's listening to this, and to you, Craig, I would say this, this is a different election cycle than we've had in recent memory. In the past, we've had assembly candidates, Senate candidates who have come and talked about wanting to bring this money back to the district for this and that. We don't have that luxury right now. We have I think last we checked, I know the governor has a different estimate, but the last figure I remember hearing was a $68 billion projected deficit. there could be very tough times ahead for this state. The impossible decisions of what gets funded and what doesn't, or what projects get deferred and what don't.
Do you have any idea why we went from a surplus to a deficit? Was there a main cause of that? I mean, I don't really know why that would have happened.
I mean, the short answer is that we have a lot of different revenue streams, and some of them are more static or subject to change than others. But what I can tell you is that in Burbank, we have a fantastic resource in Jennifer Becker, who's able to forecast what our revenue stream is going to be. I do feel like the legislature has to own this a little bit more. To go from a historic surplus to a deficit so large, I mean, I understand there's an unpredictability to all of it, but at the end of the day, we need to be doing a better job of being more accurate and even conservative in our forecasting measures, because this isn't good. We have money that was doled out for all these projects. Now we're having to claw it back or talk about deferred infrastructure investment.
Yeah, because, well, as you said, an example in Burbank, we faced years ago a huge pension problem. And if we would not have gotten ahead of it and started to fund it, in advance, a lot of cities went bankrupt. And have been having a hard time, even counties went bankrupt, had a hard time recovering from that. So we had the forethought of a city to take that, and our budget is balanced fine, and we have a small surplus ourselves here.
We do.
So what is it that you think we should look at for that what would you change to try to, because you're right, politicians sometimes, and in all honesty, I think the reason we got into a problem with our pensions in Burbank is we had council members who wanted to give raises to everybody all the time in the public sector, and then not thinking about 20 years down the line when they would go to retire, and by then they're off the council and they're not the ones who have to worry about how to pay for it. Yeah. So that's, how do you write those checks? They have to cash later.
So, what I would say, this would be my approach if lucky enough to represent you in the assembly. I would not be going to the assembly to turn around and run for LA City Council like a former school board member did. No disrespect, but that's not my end game. I'm not running for this seat to run for something else. I've been very happy, and I've enjoyed every minute on the city council. If I go to the assembly, I'm going there to do that job for up to 12 years, which is the term limit that we have under state law. You can't be in the assembly or the Senate more than 12 years. The reason I bring that up is because I think our job is to not just think about the here and the now, but the long-term health of our state. And so, just because you have all this money right now doesn't mean you should spend all of it. I would take a similar approach to what we've done in Burbank. We've taken some of our one-time available money and our recurring surplus, and we've said, let's invest it in proactively paying down our unfunded pension liability, because that actually has cost savings now, but it improves our long-term financial health. The other thing I would say is that when I took office in 2020, as you well know, Craig, I mean, I know you reported on it. We had, even after, after the sales tax increase, we had, because of COVID-19, a pretty large deficit, a recurring deficit in the city. The way we managed out of that is we didn't go and find a new tax. We were just very good about putting in place cost savings measures, waiting to fill vacancies. When we asked our employees to do more with less, but we managed through that. And look at where we are today. We have a surplus forecasted for the foreseeable future. I think that's what we need to do at the state level.
I think that a lot of the candidates really don't have that experience, know what it's like to have to deal with a budget and with the labor unions and everything else, because you're right. Our labor unions nicely did not take pay raises and like that. And since then, the new contract negotiations, you've now rewarded them for their patience and everything else. And I know our firefighters are more than ecstatic with their contract. So, but I think a lot of the candidates right now, like you said, very little experience, and when it comes to things like budgeting, budgeting is not sexy. Budgeting is kind of a boring thing, but budgeting is what makes the sausage work,
Well, absolutely. And Craig, I'll tell you one other thing. A lot of folks will come in and talk about how they'd manage a budget. I'll just tell you right off the bat, there are things that we can talk about: cost savings, deferring, infrastructure expenditures right now. The one thing I will never support is a budget that cuts programming and critical funding to those most vulnerable in our community, those most at risk of falling into homelessness, those who need the help the most. I'm talking about our kids. I'm talking about people with disabilities. I'm talking about our seniors. We can talk about deferring high-speed rail. I mean, we can talk about deferring some things, but we have to understand that those who need the social safety net right now more than ever, who are most at risk in our community, we cannot cut another dollar from education, the arts, you name it. That's what I want to be there in Sacramento to fight for, to ensure that we're not cutting another dollar from our students, for example.
I think it's going to be tough because right now you've got a high-speed rail line that's probably 1/3 funded and done, and if we were to ban it, that's going to sit there like a sore thumb for years and years to come. But you're right about when it comes to healthcare and housing, as we all know, and people, when you see those bills, you see an AB something or an SB something, those are Assembly bills and Senate bills. So that's where these laws are coming from that we're dealing with. Now, let's be honest. We got caught off guard by SB 9, Senate Bill number 9, that was passed in, I think, 2017. And it wasn't until around 2019 or so that a developer came in here and used it, and we were kind of caught off guard. So if you make it to Assembly, how can you help, if anything, how can you help cities like Burbank, small cities, when it comes to some of these state regulations, either give them a heads up or look at it from their point of view also? I think that you'll be more unique as coming from a small city to say, hey, this is how small cities work, and this is how we should consider. Because sometimes one bill fits all is not the case, as we found in SB 9.
So let me talk about just my my general approach. I think that is a strength I would have as a candidate. I have been on a city council. I've also been on a planning commission, not in Burbank, but when I was living in the city of LA, I was on one of the planning commissions. To your point, when a bill, let's say I'm in the Assembly and there's a new housing bill that comes up, obviously I have connections with Burbank city staff and Burbank electeds, but I think I would have a duty to also communicate to the electeds and staff in Glendale and to the council districts, that LA city council districts that overlap with this Assembly seat, and that's proactive leadership. That's talking about, here's this bill. Here's what Senator so-and-so is proposing. I want to understand how this could impact you. And I think that having someone from Burbank who has seen what's worked and maybe some of the unintended consequences of legislation, whether it's housing or related to any other issue, someone who has served in local government, I think understands who to ask and where to go to really inform themselves. And, the other thing I'll just say, Craig, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier about, what, like, when you were saying, like, what the surprising things, what have you found out?
Right.
It's not just this seat, but as you look around across the state, a lot of first-time candidates, folks without a lot of experience, run for the state legislature, and then they run for something else. I'm kind of going in reverse in a lot of ways. But I think that's actually refreshing, because I have seen how state laws and any issue actually impact locally. And that's why I want to go up there, because I think there's a really intelligent way to design legislation that helps local governments accomplish our shared goals, like getting to 100% renewable clean energy. I mean, at the end of the day, we all want to get there. The question is, how do you get there? And also, how do you get there without crushing ratepayers with all the increases that we're going to need to build all of that infrastructure? And I think that you've had a legislature that thinks very big picture, top line, we have to do this. What we need a lot more of is that granular detail, the real sweat equity of saying, and this is how we achieve that goal, and do it in a way that is equitable, socioeconomically.
I think that's a great point, because I think cities are sometimes, we're all lumped together, and Burbank is not Sonoma, and Sonoma is not Eureka, and every
Right.
city has its own unique characteristics, and sometimes to put one rule for every city, sometimes I think there always needs to be a clause or something to help a city negotiate it. 'Cause I know Beverly Hills, I think, just got slapped for their SB 9 housing problem and are no longer allowed to have any commercial building in their city. It has to only be
Yeah.
housing now. So, that for a city like Beverly Hills, that's a very unique city also. So they're going, you think it's tough in Burbank?
Yeah.
Thinking about Beverly Hills right now, but
Well,
Go ahead and respond.
Oh no, I would just say just two quick points on that, Craig. So, first of all, to your point, I think that representing this district effectively means understanding how unique Burbank is, but also, understanding how unique Glendale is and the different you have to represent and really get on the ground.
And areas like Van Nuys and Sherman Oaks are part of a larger city, not just their own they don't make their own decisions. They're part of a larger structure there too.
That's right. And yet you still have to understand the nuances of Studio City or Valley Village, right? I mean, it's all of it. But the other thing I would just say, just very quickly, for the sake of time, but on the housing front, one of the reasons that I'm running is that I see an affordability crisis looming in our district and across the state. For the most part, wages are remaining largely stagnant in comparison to the very high cost of living here. That includes high rents, high home prices, high gas at the pump, high cost of groceries, you name it. Point is, it's never been harder than ever to just make it here. People are working multiple jobs and still barely making ends meet. So to solve the problem, you really got to look at both ends of the equation. You got to recruit and retain high quality, good paying jobs here. And that's why we need to do things like making the California Film Industry Tax Credit Program, which has been a huge success, making it a permanent fixture, not extending it every 5-10 years, but making it a permanent fixture of our economic development strategy. That would be one thing. But on the other end, you got to tackle housing affordability. We do need more housing. We should be embracing opportunities to grow in the places that make a lot of sense, like the old IKEA location. It is perfect for housing, and it's close to jobs and transit. And then, at the same time, we also have to embrace the fact that even if we add all this housing, it doesn't get added and open its doors overnight. So what do we do to protect our tenants, to prevent people from being displaced from the communities that they've long called home? It's an all of the above approach, but really, I mean, right now, if there's one thing I would tell you, it's across the district, people are feeling the pain. I mean, they're feeling the high cost of everything. It's crushing the middle class, and that's an issue I want to solve.
It's interesting that, I watch national news every night. And they're saying, well, gas prices now have leveled off at $3.45. I go, what? I wish gas prices were $3.45. So I mean, we're always paying $1 more than anywhere else in the country. I mean, a lot of it's our taxes and everything else for our roads and all the things we have on there. But I mean, I think the gas companies are I really believe they're all in collusion to set a price because all of a sudden a bomb goes off in some country and gas goes up the next day because of concerns of our oil prices. I mean, how does something that goes on halfway across the world affect prices the next day at the gas pump? But that's something California needs to look at down the line. That's another one of those issues for the high cost of living in California. Especially we have all these refineries here in our own state.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other issue, which I'll save for next time with you.
Well, Ed, I'll let you get to your next question, but one final thing, Craig. I mean, people wonder why I care passionately about this issue. It's because, I mean, look, selfishly as a parent, but look, even as a council member, I've heard it from people in our community. It is so darn expensive here that kids and grandkids can't afford to grow up where they live. And that's sad to me. And I worry about what kind of job my kids might get one day or where they could afford to live. I mean, these are not theoretical issues to me. These are issues that I want to tackle for their benefit and for the benefit of all of us right now. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is there's a lot of great people running in this race. And I don't think any of them have a bad intention. I think that frankly, each one of us could probably do a good job. The issue is, and the reason why I'm in this race is that we don't have any more time for on-the-job training. We need people that are there day one, ready to start finding solutions, because more time that goes on, the longer we wait for these solutions to arrive, people are leaving California. These problems are getting worse day by day. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have every answer, but I'm not going to take the status quo for the answer. We need to be pushing the envelope on healthcare, education, the environment, housing, job creation and retention, all of it.
Yeah, well, a lot they've done lately is they're trying to kill Prop 13, and a lot of people are being affected by what got voted on Prop 49 before. So, I mean, if I wasn't lucky enough to keep my parents' home here, which I inherited, and I still have Prop 13 taxes here, I couldn't afford to live in Burbank anymore, or probably in California. So a lot of that, yeah, that's up to legislators to correct. We're about done here.
Sure.
And I've loved this. I've thrown every question I can think of. You've come back with great answers, and you're on top of the ball. So what I like to do at the end is give you a couple minutes here to speak your piece to the voters and tell them why is it when they walk in that little voting booth and they pick up that little pencil to punch that ballot, why should they punch Nick Schultz for assembly member of the 44th district?
You know, there's so much to say, but let me just say right out the gate that serving on the Burbank City Council has been the honor of a lifetime. And the thought of it coming to an end really does make me sad because, I mean, I've loved every minute of the experience. But I decided to run for assembly because we've talked about so many issues: high cost of housing, stagnant wages, an entertainment industry that's against the ropes, rising crime rates. I know we didn't get into that, but all these issues, right? And at the end of the day, like I've said a couple times now, I looked in my heart, I looked at the field of candidates, and I asked myself, do I think that there's someone better, more prepared, more ready to go day one to tackle these issues and to get good results? And the only reason I threw my hat in the ring is because these issues matter to me. They're affecting every Burbanker. And so this is not me leaving Burbank behind. It's me saying, I love this community. I want to serve it as best I can. I got 4 amazing colleagues on the council, and at least 3 of them are going to continue to be there next year. We need someone fighting for us in Sacramento as these decisions are made, whether it's the budget, environmental law, housing, and I'm prepared to do that. The other thing, the question I get a lot of times is, okay, you're potentially leaving for the assembly. What did you do with your time on council? I mean, what is your track record of accomplishment? Why should I vote for you? What I would say is that I'm really proud of what my colleagues, former and current, and I have done in the 3+ years I've had on the council. We inherited a budget deficit. We turned that around in about a little less than 2 years. We passed a greenhouse gas reduction plan, an updated one that takes the theory of let's get to 100% clean energy and actually charted this out. This is what Burbank needs to do step by step to actually achieve our climate goals. In terms of housing, we've entitled over 1,000 units of housing in the last 3 years. That's more units of housing, including units earmarked for low and very low income, than we had approved in the previous 20 years. Homelessness, based on the 2020 numbers, at a time when homelessness was on the rise across Los Angeles County by 4.08%, we had an almost 10% drop in our unhoused population because of the things we're doing, like the safe storage program and the Streets Plus outreach program in downtown Burbank. And then I would say the one last thing on top of all of that, and even inheriting the budget problem, we continue to have a safe community with top-notch police, fire, and emergency medical services in the region. I mean, nobody compares to us. So I look back on the last 3 years and I think, look, have we done everything I wanted to do? No, there's still more I want to do in terms of preventing gun violence, but I am very proud of all that we have accomplished together. And we still have a whole year ahead of us to do a whole lot more. But at the end of the day, I think it's that experience, having inherited a bad situation. No other candidate can say they took office at the height of the pandemic when people didn't know when or if or how we would reopen our economy and get back to normal. I've weathered that storm, and I feel that all of that experience prepares me to not just be a good advocate for Burbankers, but to be ready to go day one. And so the very last thing I'll say is this, Greg. If I'm lucky enough to be elected to the seat and to serve, I am a part of this community. I'm not going anywhere. I love Burbank. My kids are here. My family's here. Our home is here. And so I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that the legislation coming out of Sacramento reflects our values, fits our interest, and I'm going to go up there as a representative for Burbank, of course, but for representatives for this entire district. And I'm going to give it my all for as long as the voters will have me.
Well, I'm going to say this. I applaud you 100%. The media and the politicians have always sometimes had a contentious relationship. I think our job at Meyer Burbank is kind of be a watchdog sometimes too. But in the 3 years that you've been on the council, you've never dodged a question. You've never not communicated. We've had our disagreements.
Sure.
And, you have your point of view, I have mine, and we talk very civilly about it and understand each other. And I appreciate that as a member of the media, that you've always worked with us and explained things and never hidden from us.
Right. Well, thank you, Craig. And I know we're at time. I just want to leave your listeners with this. If you're still on the fence or if you want to learn more, couple things. You can go to votenickschultz.com. You can go there. You can read about my background, things we've talked about today. You can also read in detail my policy ideas, my proposals, all the things we didn't get to talk about. They're all up there. And if you have any questions at all, you can text me or you can call me. I'm at 818-806-9392, or you can shoot me an email, nick@votenickschultz.com. You have a little over a month, or about a month, I guess, to get your ballot in. And the point I'm trying to make is, if you have a question, if there's something I can answer for you to help you make your mind up and decide whether Nick Schultz is my guy or not, I'm there and I'm available to answer those questions.
Well, I know I got the text today from the registrar saying your ballot's in the mail. So I got a text today.
They're coming.
They're out there. Nick, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. I think it's really important for people to know who you are. And we invite any candidate who's going to appear on the Burbank ballot to, you're welcome to send us an email and say, I want to be on the show, and we'll be glad to have you on. It doesn't matter what party you're in or what race you're in. If you're on the ballot in Burbank, then that's an issue for us. Anyhow, Craig Sherwood saying thank you very much, and we will talk to you next time.
My Burbank Talks would like to thank all of My Burbank's advertisers for their continued support. Burbank Water and Power, Cusimano Real Estate Group, UME Credit Union, Burbank Chamber of Commerce, Gain Credit Union, Providence St. Joseph Medical Center, Community Chevrolet, Media City Credit Union, UCLA Health, Tequila's Burbank, Logix Credit Union, Hill Street Cafe, Bertain Escobar Wealth Management, and the UPS Store on 3rd Street.